when I first looked at this, and this came out a couple of days ago, I thought, well, I don't know if I'm going to talk about that. I've talked about the Constitutional Convention, that you have a lot of conservatives pushing that, but it's kind of old news. And I looked at this and I thought, that's just kind of a scare tactic. But it's actually still going on. And they just had one of the reasons that this came up. It was timely because these people are trying to establish a constitutional convention, the Republican establishment that is trying to do this. And that's the thing you should be concerned about. It is coming from the Republican establishment. And you should be concerned about the Constitutional Convention if you understand the history that I've talked about. And, John Birch Society, the New American, have really focused on what happened when people went to make some minor modifications to the Articles of Confederation. That was our first and only Constitutional Convention. They just threw out the Articles of Confederation and they created the Constitution. And the Constitution is not all that great a document if you don't have the Bill of Rights in it. And that was added later. So we should be concerned about the power of that Constitutional Convention. They point out so far 19 GOP states have joined a rapidly growing conservative movement in order to call a new convention. As former Republican Senator Rick Santorum said when he addressed Republican lawmakers gathered in San Diego at the American Legislative Exchange Council Policy Summit, he detailed a plan to fundamentally remake the United States. He said, you take this grenade and you pull the pin and you got a live piece of ammo in your hands. And that's a pretty good description. That's the kind of description that the New American and the John Birch Society, people who look at this issue, people who understand the history of the Constitutional Convention, that's a pretty good description of it. By creating this Constitutional Convention, you've got a live grenade and you just pull the pin on it. You don't know what's going to happen next. And it's also concerning that he made this speech and that the people who are lined up behind this are the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. I've talked about them many times. This is a right-wing and I say, labels, right-wing, conservative, all the rest of the stuff. Look, they are GOP establishment. Let's just put it that way. They're GOP establishment. They're like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce type of GOP establishment. The American Legislative Exchange Council, I first became aware of them when they threw their weight behind Tom Tillis, putting in toll roads in North Carolina, how they made this guy leapfrog the real conservatives who had been there for a long time in a minority in North Carolina. And then in the 2010 elections, after North Carolina had voted for Barack Obama, they had a massive buyer's remorse and went all Republican, except for the congressional seats, which were established by the gerrymandering. But everything else changed. And so they had a majority there. And when I saw what was happening with Tom Tillis, they promoted him into Speaker of the House. He put in toll roads in North Carolina for the first time. And the way that happens is that you go to the American Legislative Exchange Council. People like Tom Tillis, people like Rick Santorum, go to this. It's a country club event. And the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, has pieces of legislation that they want passed. And they hand it to these guys. And they say, put the name of the state up at the top and sign it at the bottom and turn it in your homework. That's how we get things like the Model State Health Emergency Powers Act, which was used to lock us all down. That was model legislation that was put out by the Bush administration after they had war-gamed the lockdown and vaccine 2 months before 9/11, after they'd had the anthrax false flag attack 1 week after 9/11, then 2 months after 9/11, they put out this Model State Health Emergency Powers Act as model legislation, said, here, take this home and pass as much of this as you can. And that's what the American Legislative Exchange Council is for. And these are people who have that same kind of agenda as the Bushes and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and stuff like that. And it is a grenade without a pin. This last December, in December of 2021, the ALEC meeting represented a flashpoint in a movement that has been spearheaded by powerful conservative interests, some of whom are tied to Trump world and share many of Trump's goals to alter the nation's legal text, the Constitution. It is an effort that has largely taken place out of public view. And so they have another meeting that is coming up this December in Denver. And they just had what they call the Academy of States 3.0. That took place this last Sunday. And that is why they were doing that. So it was current news. It wasn't just a scare tactic from Politico. But you should be very concerned about who's going to write this. I don't know that it would even be written by establishment Republicans. That would be scary enough from what I've seen of establishment Republicans if they were to do it. Can you imagine if Chuck Schumer and Manchin decide that they would come up with a new constitution after what you see they just came up with? Do you really want to have a constitution that's written by Schumer and Manchin and Mitch McConnell? Is that what you want? No, thank you. No, thank you. That's what the establishment parties want. And so they're using this now as a fear tactic, but the Democrats would love to have this. They would love to have it just like they love the precedents that Trump gave them for pushing the vaccine mandates, pushing the red flags, and the precedent of saying we're going to do gun control by executive order with a bump stock ban. Oh, they'll love that kind of stuff. And so, as I pointed out, they had their mock convention this last Sunday, and they said John Eastman, who has been very much in the news with the January the 6th stuff, had said he'd been at a previous one of these Academy of States where they go through an exercise to see how they would run the Convention of States, kind of wargaming it. And so John Eastman said, it's the most extraordinary thing in my career that I've ever been a part of, he said. It was in a video that was produced by the organizers who were simulating a constitutional convention, and he was part of a simulated constitutional convention. He says the process actually works. Do you really trust him? This is a guy who was leading everybody, by the leash on the January the 6th stuff. Do you trust that guy? And so they said it's got the boosters include a lot of Trump's current and former allies, including John Eastman, but also Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. This is one of the biggest marks against Ron DeSantis that I've seen. He's also, in the past, before he threatened social media companies with fines if they were to gag the speech of politicians. I'm not so sure about you and I, but if they gagged the speech of politicians, he threatened to fine them with legislation. But before that, he threatened anybody that said anything negative about the state of Israel. It's like, what? What is that about? Is there an exception for any foreign government in free speech in the Constitution? Not that I'm aware of. If you can sign on to that as a law, completely ignoring the First Amendment, I don't want you as part of a constitutional convention, DeSantis. Sorry. I mean, he's done a lot of good things, but I don't trust him. You should never trust any of these politicians. As Patrick Henry said, regard with suspicion anyone who approaches the precious jewel of liberty, and that's our Bill of Rights right now. He said, bind them down with the chains of the Constitution. I don't want these guys fabricating a new constitution. And then they also pointed out Fox News personalities like Sean Hannity and Mark Levin. Mark Levin has been a big supporter of this. And I wasn't aware that Sean Hannity had been throwing his weight behind it. But be very careful of that. Just ask yourself, these politicians who regularly ignore everything about the Constitution, both the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, do you really want them writing a new Constitution? Is it going to solve anything? Because we've got a Constitution that they're ignoring now. If they're going to ignore this Constitution, why would we give them the authority to change the Constitution? These unfaithful oath breakers just want to break the authority of the Constitution. They have a lot of power, but they have no authority. And that's the beauty of the Constitution right now. It shows that these people are just powerful tyrants. And we know what happens to powerful tyrants eventually. But don't let them get the authority by destroying the Constitution. the common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity, created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.